What happens when the truth you've buried for decades suddenly surfaces, written in your own hand? When the empire you built on illusions crumbles, not from enemies outside, but from secrets within. In the golden heart of Accra, beneath glass towers and marble corridors, one man stood above them all. Respected. Untouchable. Wealthy beyond measure. But buried in the pages of a forgotten diary lay a truth so devastating, it would unravel everything, one word at a time. This isn't just a story about wealth. It's a story about what happens when the mask slips, and the world finally sees what was hidden underneath. Before his name became a warning, there was Victor. A billionaire. A philanthropist. A man the world admired. Welcome to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every truth demands to be heard. Now, before we begin, where in the world are you watching from? Is it morning in Lagos, evening in Nairobi, or midnight in London? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now, lean in. Because this isn't just about what happened, it's about what it cost. Victor Mensah stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, gazing down at Accra like a king surveying his kingdom. 40 stories below, the city paused with life, vendors hawking wares, taxis honking, children laughing on their way to school. He owned half of what he saw. Hotels. Banks. Shopping malls. His name was engraved on universities and hospitals. Mothers pointed to his billboards and told their children, work hard, and you could be like Victor Mensah. He was more than wealthy. He was a legend. And legends, he had learned long ago, were built not on truth, but on the story people wanted to believe. He adjusted his silk tie and turned back to his mahogany desk, where a young journalist named Grace sat across from him, notebook open, eyes bright with admiration. She was writing a profile piece for African Business Today, another crown jewel for his carefully curated image. Mr. Mensah, she began, her voice soft with reverence, people say you started with nothing. That you sold mangoes on the streets of Kumasi as a boy. Is that true? Victor smiled, the practiced, warm smile that had disarmed presidents and charmed investors. It is, he said smoothly. I know what it means to be hungry, Grace. To watch your mother cry because there's no food. That's why I give back. That's why I build schools. Because no child should grow up the way I did. Grace scribbled furiously, her face glowing. She believed every word. They all did. But what Victor didn't tell her, what he never told anyone, was that the boy who sold mangoes had died a long time ago. The man who sat before her now had been built brick by brick, lie by lie, until even he sometimes forgot where the truth ended and the legend began. He had worked hard, yes. But he had also stepped on backs, stolen ideas, silenced voices, and burned bridges to get where he was. And he had written it all down. Every betrayal. Every sin. Every dirty secret. Not because he was proud, but because he had been afraid. Afraid he would forget who he really was. Afraid the mask would become permanent. So he had kept a diary. A single leather-bound book hidden in a safe behind a painting in his childhood home in Kumasi, a place he hadn't visited in 15 years. As Grace asked her next question, Victor's phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from his younger brother, Kwame, a man he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The text was short, just 4 words, they found your diary. Victor's heart stopped. His hand trembled as he set the phone down, his smile never faltering. Grace didn't notice. She was too busy gazing at him with the kind of admiration reserved for heroes. Mr. Mensah, she said, if you could give one piece of advice to young entrepreneurs, what would it be? Victor looked at her, his throat suddenly dry. His voice came out steady, smooth, as rehearsed as ever. Always remember where you came from, he said. Because the truth, always finds a way to catch up. Grace smiled and thanked him. But as she left, Victor sat alone in his golden tower, staring at the phone in his hand. The world he had built, the empire, the legacy, the lie, was about to come crashing down. And the weapon that would destroy him wasn't in the hands of an enemy. It was in his own handwriting. For the first time in 30 years, Victor Mense felt afraid. Not of losing his money. Not of losing his power. But of the world finally seeing who he really was. And that terrified him more than anything. By nightfall, the story had already begun to spread. It started as a whisper on social media, a blurry photo of a leather diary, its pages yellowed with age, Victor's unmistakable handwriting scrawled across them. Within hours, the whisper became a roar. Bloggers picked it up. News channels ran teasers. Hashtag stranded, hashtag Mense diary. Hashtag fallen icon. Hashtag the truth revealed. Victor sat in his living room, surrounded by his legal team, his PR manager, and his wife, Abina, a woman who had stood beside him for 25 years, silent and elegant, the perfect accessory to his perfect life. Now, she sat across from him, arms folded, eyes cold. "Is it real?" she asked quietly. Victor didn't answer. He didn't need to. She could see it in his eyes. The diary had been found by accident. Kwame, Victor's estranged brother, had gone back to their childhood home in Kumasi to settle their late mother's estate. The house was crumbling, forgotten, filled with dust and memories. Behind a faded painting of their mother, Kwame had found the safe. Inside was the diary, a relic Victor had buried and tried to forget. Kwame had opened it, expecting old receipts or family photos. Instead, he found a confession. Page after page of Victor's rise to power, written in his own hand. The deals he had sabotaged. The partners he had betrayed. The girl he had loved and abandoned when she became pregnant because she didn't fit his ambitions. The workers he had cheated out of their wages. The journalist he had bribed to bury a corruption story. And worst of all, the fire. The factory fire that killed 12 people, blamed on faulty wiring. When Victor knew the truth, he had cut corners on safety to save money. Kwame had tried calling Victor first. When Victor didn't answer, Kwame made a choice. He leaked the diary to a journalist, not for money, but for justice. For all the people Victor had crushed on his way up. For their mother, who had died believing her son was a saint. For the truth. Now, the pages were everywhere. Screenshots circulated online. News anchors read excerpts on live television. Victor's name, once spoken with reverence, was now spat out with disgust. His phone rang non-stop. Investors pulled out. Board members resigned. The university that bore his name announced they were removing his plaque. His PR manager looked at him with hollow eyes. "We can't spin this, Victor," she said. "This isn't a scandal. This is, you. In your own words." Victor's wife stood and walked to the window, her back to him. "I defended you," Abina said quietly, her voice breaking. "When people whispered about you, I defended you. I told our children you were a good man. I believed you." She turned, tears streaming down her face. "Who are you?" Victor opened his mouth, but no words came. Because he didn't know anymore. The mask had been ripped off, and underneath was a man he had spent 30 years trying to forget. The next morning, Victor stood in front of a wall of cameras, microphones thrust toward him like weapons. His lawyer had advised him to stay silent. But Victor knew silence would only make it worse. He had built his empire on words, on stories, on lies. Now, he would have to face the truth. "I wrote those words," Victor said, his voice hollow. "Everything in that diary is true. I am not the man you thought I was. I am not the man I pretended to be." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But Victor kept speaking, his voice steady now, stripped of the charm and polish that had carried him so far. I hurt people. I lied. I put profit over lives. And I justified it because I told myself I came from nothing, and I deserved everything. He paused, his hands trembling. But the truth is, I became the very thing I once feared. I became the man who takes and never gives back. Who climbs and kicks the ladder away. The cameras kept rolling. The world kept watching. And for the first time in decades, Victor Mensah told the truth. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within a week, Victor lost nearly everything. His companies were investigated. Lawsuits piled up. Former employees came forward with their own stories of mistreatment and exploitation. The factory fire was reopened as a criminal case. His assets were frozen. His name, once golden, was now tarnished beyond repair. His children stopped speaking to him. Abina filed for separation. And Victor, the man who had once stood above the city like a god, now sat alone in a rented apartment in a quiet suburb of Accra, surrounded by silence. But something unexpected happened. As the world condemned him, as the media dissected every line of his diary, a few voices began to ask a different question: what do we do with a man who confesses? A young pastor named Samuel reached out to Victor, not with judgment, but with an invitation. Come to my church, Samuel said over the phone. Not to defend yourself. Not to ask for forgiveness you haven't earned. But to begin the work of making amends. Victor hesitated. He had never been religious. But he had nowhere else to go. So he went. The church was small, tucked into a neighborhood Victor had never visited despite living in Accra all his life. The congregation was made up of people he had never noticed: street vendors, taxi drivers, single mothers, ex-convicts rebuilding their lives. People who knew what it meant to fall. When Victor walked in, heads turned. Whispers spread. But no one asked him to leave. Pastor Samuel invited Victor to speak. Not to a crowd of admirers, but to a room of people who had every reason to hate him. Victor stood at the front, his hands shaking, his voice raw. I don't know how to fix what I've broken, he began. I don't know if I even can. But I'm here because I don't want to die as the man I became. I want to try to be the boy I once was. The boy who knew hunger. Who knew kindness. Who knew what it meant to need help. He paused, tears streaming down his face. I can't undo the fire. I can't bring back the 12 people who died. But I can use what's left of my life to do something real. Something true. The room was silent. Then, slowly, an older woman in the back stood. Her name was Oma, and her son had died in the factory fire. She walked to the front, her face lined with grief, and looked Victor in the eyes. You took my son, she said, her voice steady. And no apology will bring him back. Victor nodded, unable to speak. But, Oma continued, if you mean what you say, then don't waste the life you still have. Live it for the people you hurt. Live it for my son. Victor spent the next 5 years doing exactly that. He sold what little remained of his wealth and poured it into programs for factory workers, fire safety reforms, and compensation funds for victims' families. He worked alongside them, not as a philanthropist cutting checks from a distance, but as a man on the ground, carrying bricks, listening to stories, learning names. He no longer wore expensive suits or attended galas. He lived simply, quietly, without fanfare. And slowly, painfully slowly, he began to rebuild. Not his empire. Not his reputation. But his humanity. The diary that had destroyed his legacy became the foundation of a different kind of story, one written not in leather-bound pages, but in sweat, apology, and relentless, humble work. One afternoon, Grace, the young journalist who had once admired him, came to interview him again. But this time, she didn't come with admiration. She came with questions. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "The confession." Victor looked at her, his face weathered, his hands calloused. "I regret what I did," he said. "But confessing? No. Because the lie was killing me. And the truth, painful as it was, set me free." Grace nodded slowly, scribbling in her notebook. Then she asked one final question. "Do you think you'll ever be forgiven?" Victor smiled, not the polished smile of a billionaire, but the tired, honest smile of a man who had finally stopped pretending. "I don't know," he said. "But I'm not doing this for forgiveness. I'm doing it because it's right. And for the first time in my life, that's enough." Years later, when Victor passed away, there were no grand funerals, no statues, no headlines. Just a quiet burial attended by a small group of workers, pastors, and families, people whose lives he had touched not with money, but with truth. And on his gravestone, they didn't write billionaire or philanthropist. They wrote, a man who fell. A man who rose. A man who finally told the truth. Victor Mensa never rebuilt his empire. But in his final years, he built something far more valuable, a life rooted in truth, humility, and service. Not because it restored his name, but because he finally chose to live with his mask removed. The lesson: a reputation built on lies will always crumble. But a life rebuilt on truth, no matter how painful, can still find redemption. And the truth, no matter how long it's buried, always finds its way to the light. If this story moved you, hit like, share it, and tell me in the comments, is it better to live a lie in comfort, or face the truth and lose everything? Subscribe to Stories by the King, where every truth demands to be heard, and every choice carries a lesson. This is Stories by the King, where truth heals, and courage finds its home.